Okay, so we will then go ahead and start our first talk from A Peterson and Ken Van Vick about participant marking in a language they will pronounce for you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So this is Ken Van Vick, and with my colleague David Peterson, we call him Dave. So our topic, as you can see here, is participant marking in Lawmtuk-Ruawghawn. And this presentation is also our report for an SF-funded project to do documentation on 4 endangered languages in Chin State, Myanmar. And one of them is this language we call LR. As you can see from the last subgrouping schema of Peterson 2017, we assume that this language belongs to the central group for now. And as you can see also in the map, beautifully done by SIL, there are 2 villages, Lawmtuk and Ruawghawn, that we call them the language of the name. I want us to know that it is also noted as TAWR, Thor, which is an exonym given by a neighboring village. And these 2 villages, as you can see, are in the main road from Hakka to Mandalay. And therefore, these speakers are trilingual, fluent in Lawmtuk-Ruawghawn, Lai, and Burmese. And I think that's 2 reasons why they are endangered. The youth are moving out from the village just for further education. And for our methodology, we work through Hakka-Lai, a language our consultants all speak fluency. We only have about 4 texts fully claused and verify with consultants, but have consultant transcription and Lai translation for the larger amount of material. And this is so far of necessity supplemented by direct elicitation with consultants to fill in paradigm holes. So a few words on phonology. The language, fairly standard segmental inventory for this part of South Central Kuki-Chin. Apart from a voice velar fricative reflecting the proto-W written as G in our examples. And there's no clear glottalized sonorant as in Lai. And we observed 3 tones so far, but our analysis of the underlying system and tone sandhi phenomena, as well as grammatical tone, is still in a nascent stage. And the main talk of our presentation and the goals are to outline the basic verbal participant marking system in LR, to illustrate the basic system in action with some examples drawn from the naturalistic text corpus we are currently collecting for the language, to note some complication involving irrealist forms, issues of grammatical tone, and if we have time, to consider some aspects of the markers diachrony. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Dave.
Thanks. So if you came in, I've been distributing handouts. Hopefully I've gotten them to everybody. Ken, I'll let you take over that now, in case you hear somebody come in. So I'm going to start by sketching out the participant marking essentials. I'll talk first about SA marking, and then I'll talk about P marking. And I'm assuming most people are familiar with the SAP designations for the single participant associated with intransitives, S, the more active or agent-like participant associated with transitive events, A, and the more passive or patient-like participant in a transitive sentence, the P. So the treatment of S and A participants differs according to whether the verb occurs in a declarative main clause, where you get suffixal participant marking, or elsewhere. So in this case, you get prefixal participant marking. So for instance, in at least content questions, I'm going to steer clear of yes/no questions because they're more complicated than we want to go into for today. Subordinate clauses also show this prefixal participant marking. So you can see the markers there, and the forms on the right-hand side. If you're familiar with especially Central Chin languages, you will recognize a lot of the markers there. The one thing I'll mention there is that there's an N plural marker that you see in the first, second, and third persons. On the other hand, looking at the left-hand side where you have the suffixal forms, there is a palatal plural marker in the first plural exclusive and the second plural, is what that looks like. So there is no evidence of a dual plural distinction in the participant marking, but the independent inclusive pronouns do appear to distinguish a dual versus a plural. Not reflected in the participant marking, however. So, so I'm going to turn to some examples from the corpus, and looking at examples 3 and 4, third singular S and A in main clauses. I'm not going to illustrate it for every single possibility here, S and A for every case. That would be too many examples, and we're already in danger of being over time, I'm sure. The third singular and third plural S and A in main clauses is simply unmarked. So if you look at the last verb, the verb cook in the first, or in the only sentence in 3, you don't see any marking associated with that verb in the case of a third singular. If you look at the A sentence in 4, you don't see any participant marking associated with the verb go, which I unfortunately did not underline. That should be underlined. Let's see, the subordinate clause in 3. So there's a temporal subordinate clause marked by tik and then a deictic kun. However, there's a third singular participant there, and in that case, you get an prefixal marker from the prefixal paradigm. And similarly, in example 4, you have a temporal, again, similar sort of clause marked slightly differently, but still involving this tik temporal marker. Is the third plural marker, and that's what you get in that subordinate context. Turning to 5, we reach a complication, which is that declarative main clauses actually appear to violate the generalization that I gave you at the outset. There are maybe only about 3 examples, and we've looked through not just the material that we've worked through carefully, but all of the material that we have available to us. There are only maybe 3 examples of second person occurring in a declarative clause, and they're all in a very strange context where somebody is telling another participant that they had killed somebody. So it's kind of an exclamatory context, and so it complicates what we maybe need to say about exactly where the prefixal forms occur, but actually you get prefixal forms in these cases where we would expect that you get a suffixal form. However, under direct elicitation conditions, consultants are very consistent about giving you the suffixal forms in these types of contexts. So still waiting to see them in the wild. So in 5B, there's a content question with well, actually B and C both have a content question with a second person singular SA marker occurring because it's in questions you get the prefixal as opposed to the suffixal paradigm. So why are there two examples of this? Well, I can explain that at some later point, but they basically show the same thing. It turns out in the C example, the speaker in question is actually speaking lie. He's not speaking, or they're not speaking. I guess it's a guy. He happens to be speaking lie. So it's not, even though it shows exactly the same thing that Lawmtuk-Ruawghawn would show us, it's actually a lie, I think. So it's maybe not a legitimate example. So in 6, again, so looking at instances of second plural SNA, they are so far unattested in declarative main clauses. And so, again, we've looked through all of the material and there's nothing there yet. You tend to ask questions of second persons rather than tell them that they've done something, I guess is the moral that you take away from this. So in content questions, just as we've seen before, you get the prefixal marker, none in the case of second plural, as you see in 6b. First singular SA is actually just the opposite, so far unattested in anything other than declarative main clauses. You see in 7 the na suffixal marker occurring on that final verb. And this is actually from, this is in reported speech. So there's part of a sentence after this, but we've just extracted this from the reported speech. This was something that somebody uttered in a particular context in a main declarative clause. This is the same thing I did with the talk yesterday. So here we go. So I think we're at about example 8. So first plural inclusive SA is very abundantly attested. And here you have the first verb. So if you look for the underlining, you see the prefixal marker for first plural inclusive. And that is, let's see, in again, that's a question, right? So it's because it's a question, you don't get the suffixal participant marking. And the next example where you get the suffixal marking, that's the answer to the question. Again, a declarative main clause in the context that it's uttered in, actually embedded in the larger structure as reported speech. And then in 9, this example shows both the first plural exclusive prefixal marking, which occurs, as we've seen in many times already, in this temporal clause subordinate type. And unfortunately, if you're looking carefully at the data, and remember that plural had the palatal plural marking in it for first plural exclusive. In this particular context, you actually don't see that marker because of the way the verb ends. A verb that ends in this glide, and actually, I think in the case of some other vowels, the palatal is unexpressed. And I don't have, we didn't include any examples that would show this, but under direct elicitation conditions, when this happens, you actually get a tonal difference in the na marker. It's higher toned in the case of first plural exclusive versus first singular, which also is what this might look like to you. So P marking is comparatively simple. You've already heard A markers are basically the markers we were talking about. S and A are marked the same way. P markers include a nasal first person P prefix, which is syllabic, so it doesn't attach as a minor syllable in a sesquisyllabic type of structure. It also assimilates in place of articulation to the root initial consonants. Second person Ps are marked by a ch prefix, and it is treated like a a minor syllable of a sesquisyllable to whatever follows it. So something like chizui or chituk. So number of P participants is neutralized, and that's a common pattern that you see in South Central languages, although not across the board. And 10, 11, and 12, I think I'm going to skip over those, but you see a first person P participant in 10, you see a second person P in 11, and then you also see third singular and third plural, which are unmarked in the examples in 12, A and B. Sorry, B is stretched over the page there. So I don't really have time to go through everything that is in the handout, I'm sure. I have not sure how much time I have left, Alexis.
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, okay. We'll see what we get to. The main complications that we see so far are in the arealis. So if you look at 13, this gives the SA marking for arealis forms. And one thing that may jump out at you is that the first singular form doesn't really look like the first plural exclusive form like it did with the previous paradigms. So this is in declarative clauses. The first singular has this ang marker, which will be immediately familiar to people who specialize in South Central languages, and probably it'll be reminiscent of things that you've seen elsewhere in Tibeto-Burman. So it may be known to you even if you're not a South Central specialist, but it's nevertheless not the na marker that we saw in the previous paradigms. So some examples of at least the first singular and the first plural arealis marker are given in the handout in 14 and 15. And I'm not gonna take the time to go through those carefully. I'll let you look at them, but I just want to give you a tentative account that we have for part of this. What we think when we look at this is that the arealis is probably based on an auxiliary chi, which is suffixed in most cases by the main declarative markers. In first plural exclusive and second plural, the J plural element that you may remember from J na and J cha simply merges with the vowel of the auxiliary because IJ sequences don't occur. It doesn't actually add any length as far as we can tell here, but that's one thing that we think happens. And we think that a likely source for chi in this historically auxiliary construction is a verb to say, which presumably also provides the source for Lawmtuk-Ruawghawn's quotative marker. You may have noticed that in previous examples. Kenneth, in a talk that she gave at the end of 2019, and I think that she also has a larger manuscript on this, has identified this verb, and I think it's not just the verb to say in the abstract, but specifically this verb, the chi verb that we see attested in this language, or its predecessor. She's identified this as a common grammaticalization source for futures in Northwestern South Central. So that would be along the lines of this. However, I forgot to point out one thing about this paradigm, which is actually very important. So the first plural inclusive. So you might note that that looks like the same thing that we said for the first plural inclusive, just of the normal main declarative clause, so non-arealis. But it turns out that those are tonally distinct. So they aren't homophonous. Something happens with the tone there, and when we eventually come to a more abstract account of what's going on with the tone in the verb complex for this language, that will be something we'll have to have something to say about. And unfortunately, our tentative account doesn't give us any clarity on why the first plural inclusive form seems to have lost the auxiliary in favor of tonal marking. So frowny face emoji for that aspect of the tentative account. So I am pretty sure I'm running close to the end of our time.
How
And if
about
we
a
want to have,
minute left?
yeah, so I'm
maybe we
going to
can
just
go to the conclusion.
yeah, I'm going to go to the conclusion, but I want to point out in the handout there are some other complications, and 3.1.2 talks about p marking, which is otherwise the same as you see elsewhere. It's just these two p markers, but there's a complication with negation in the Irialis, and then there's some other complications having to do with sequences of things which would potentially be result in homophony, but in at least one of the cases that we're aware of, there's a tonal distinction that makes things clear what's going on. 4 talks about the relationship of specific markers to other South Central participant markers, which you can take a look at and ask questions about if you would like. And I'll just conclude our talk by saying that we realize, of course, we have to do further investigation of verbal tonology for this language, and it's our experience that that takes a long time. So we hope that we'll make more progress on it soon and give you a future talk on that. We have definitely much more to do in investigating the interaction of negation, bane versus subordinate clause, and so forth. I mentioned yes/no questions before, which are a real morass. So this work is really driven by the question of Lawmtuk-Ruawghawn's relationship within Central. So is it closer to what one described as core Central, or closer to Moraic? Or is it a separate branch within Central? And our hope is that through consideration of participant marking and other aspects of the verbal complex, we'll be able to more precisely identify its position. So thanks very much, and we will try to answer questions now.
Great, thank you. And there's my virtual applause. We have about 7 or 8 minutes for questions.
Question?
Hi,
Yeah,
Jim.
Hi, Jim.
You say that yes/no questions are a real morass. In Lahu, it's quite simple. There's just a particle, yes/no. So in what way is it a real morass?
So it's a morass tonally and in terms of the markers that are involved. Yes/no questions about third person seem to involve a marker which is like ma. Other second person and first persons seem to involve a marker that we gloss as subjunctive, plus, well, yeah. And when you mix that with the Irialis, there are abbreviations or conflations of things. So things get glommed together in complex things that aren't so easily segmentable. So that, I don't know. Ken, do you want to add any? What's that, Jim? I mean, it seems like that my normal response would be, oh, yes/no questions are the simplest thing. There's just a marker, and but it doesn't quite work that way in this language. So
interesting. Well, that's worth an article or two.
There'll definitely be a whole talk.
So we have a question from Scott.
Yeah, I have a suggestion with respect to your last question. And that,
yeah,
okay, and that is that it's closest to Moraic on the basis of the cha becoming a prefix. Okay, the cha originates post-verbally, and in Mizo, it's always post-verbal in all of its functions. So the shift to pre-verbal position has to be an innovation, and that's shared here with Moraic. So I would say.
So is that a sufficient, Scott, is that in light of our talk yesterday, is that a sufficiently convincing shared innovation for you?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's a paradigmatic shift in the morphological structure of the verb paradigm. That's not just a grammaticalization of some auxiliary that's lying around.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah. That's our inclination too.
Yeah,
in some sense.
We've been so another thing which makes it look similar to Moraic, although it's not as defining, is the J plural marker, which we think is possibly related to that marker that we were talking about yesterday in our talk. Not the applicative causative ones, but also the ones that are dealing strictly with plurality, like you see in Moraic.
So.
I think time for one more quick question.
Okay, I have a question for David. Yeah, I'm just finishing up this section of a paper actually that you're waiting on about indexation in South Central languages. And it's the section about what languages have done about mixing and reinterpreting the two original paradigms. And I pretty much have written down that what you're describing here just wouldn't happen.
Oh, okay. Oh, are you talking, Scott, are you talking about the distribution?
Yes.
Okay. So
what you have here is you have the post-verbal paradigm in declarative main clauses and the other one everywhere else. Everybody else does it the other way. Everybody else, declarative main clauses where you get the prefixes no matter what. And then there are other possibilities for the post-verbals.
So I think that's a really long answer, but I don't know if Alexis will indulge us or not. We might have to take it. So we were concerned about this too, and actually this afternoon we cut out a section from the paper because we decided that we already had too much to talk about, and we would not be able to do justice to that section. So. Yeah, so it's definitely a problem. We weren't comfortable with it, but we've become somewhat more comfortable with the pattern that we see. So this is just one possibility, because I don't want to take up too much time into the next talk or get us off of schedule too badly. But one thing is the prefixal markers in this language are all identical to the possessive markers. So if things like subordinate clauses were somehow more nominal, then it might be that they decided to start treating those as
okay. That's what makes this really spooky. Because
but then they haven't. Yeah, but then they haven't.
Have to have originated in nominalizations, which means you would expect to find this pattern. You would expect to find those prominently in subordinate clauses, because that's where nominalizations would end up. And this is the first stem language in the branch that I've seen that works that way. So I don't know what to do. I also don't know how to finish the paper. Maybe I'll just
sorry about that.
So
our apologies.
Forget that I saw this, and I'll
on behalf of the Lawmtuk-Ruawghawn, we apologize.
I actually think that spooky is a nice note to end on.
Yeah, that's all right. Thanks very much. Thanks for all the questions and comments.
Yeah, and thanks for the nice talk.